Hi, I'm James, one of Robin Collier's Android field agents. Robin has asked me to tell you how to deal with a Gemini boss. So, how can you tell if he or she is a Gemini? They were born between May 22nd and June 20th. They talk all the time. They are impatient when dealing with details, and they are out of the office a lot. They will criticize your grammar. Their phone will have thesaurus.com and merriam-webster.com on the favorites list. Prepare to spend your professional life in a confused state. She wants everything right now, but tomorrow it won't be so important. Last week's high-priority item has changed, and will change again tomorrow. Of course it's your job to keep up with it. She always sees two or more sides to everything. Like Jekyll and Hyde, she has two personalities. So, how do you survive all this? First, do everything fast, or you won't have a Gemini boss for long. Talk fast, use short sentences. If writing, hit the Enter key often. Second, ask short questions. Start out with "I have a quick question." Third, think short-term. Bringing up long-term implications is a waste of time. Third, give lots of reminders. Telling her isn't enough. She cannot be bothered to remember minor items like the upcoming audit, or her upcoming meeting with the CEO. Write it on her calendar, put sticky notes on her monitor. Text her, but not too far in advance. Fourth, read between the lines. A suggestion, could you, or would you, is really an order. Take care of all the details for her, and do it fast. If you want to make her cringe, say things like "We'll have to make a commitment, you'll have to be on time, or we have to get this job done." Commitment, job, and the clock are her enemies. If you mention these too often, you will be the enemy. I really hope this helps. If you need help, email robin@astrorobin.com.
It's your birthday, and you're still stupid. You're just another day closer to the grave.
Death at your door, breathing's a chore, Maylocks is love.
It's your birthday, and hey, let's face it, you're dumb.
Dumb, yes you are dumb, incredibly dumb. Dumb, 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 dumb.
Happy birthday!
Hey folks, Thomas Lyons here for Astrology Tonight TV, astrologytonighttv.com. I'm your host astrologer. We're going to talk a bit about Pope Francis, the new Pope Francis, the former Giorgi Mario Bergoglio. I think that's roughly correct for the Italian. He comes from an Italian family, although he's born and raised in Buenos Aires, Argentina. The Pope is a very interesting guy, not surprisingly, to become Pope. This particular Pope was born with his sun in Sagittarius, which means he's outspoken, which means he's fiery and energetic, although his rising sign is Taurus, so his presentation seems very even, almost placid at times. And his Mars is in Libra. He has a strong Mars in some ways. It's in his 5th house of his natal chart, means it expresses itself the way the 5th sign of Leo tends to express itself, but his Mars is also in a very awkward place for Mars. Mars is the masculine self, Mars is your will, Mars is your drive, and Mars is in Libra in his chart, which is not considered a great place for your Mars, for your will in astrology, because it tends to be a little too self-doubting, a little too diplomatic at times, a little too much giving when you should be thinking more of your own position, thinking of others. It's a wonderful place for a person of service, but things will change. We'll talk a little bit about how things change with his chart move to the Vatican. This particular individual, now Pope Francis of the Roman Catholic Church, was born just a few days, a little less than 4 days after a solar eclipse. That means the light of the sun was eclipsed and then reborn in Sagittarius, right exactly where his sun is when he was born 4 days later. And his sun was also very close to the planet Jupiter, which rules Sagittarius, and has to do with things like intellectual pursuits, academia, a life in academia, which he has had much of his adult life as a teacher and professor in a Jesuit school. It has to do with world travel, and he hasn't done, I don't think, all that much world travel so far, but that again changes when he becomes Pope. His sun, when he was born, was in the 8th house, which equates itself with the 8th sign of astrology being Scorpio. So even though his sun is in Sagittarius, it expresses itself on the field of power that is Scorpio, being control and working behind the scenes and careful calculating and manipulation to get what he wants. And it's about power and will and authority and absolutely desiring what he desires and going after it with, in his case, patience and stability and forthrightness. Now this is a man who has a great ability to be a humanitarian. He was born with his South Node conjunct Chiron. Chiron is called the healer or the wounded healer in astrology. And it's retrograde, which means there's a deep need in him, in his soul, to be of service, to help people. And he was also born with his Venus in Aquarius conjunct his moon in Aquarius. Venus is one's values and how you relate to people to a certain degree, and also the moon is your emotional self and how you relate to people, your sort of more feminine, emotional, accessible self. Now they are in Aquarius, which means there's a part of them that's very hard to get to. It's very difficult in some ways to connect at a deeply personal level with this particular individual. But there is a great compassion for the common person and for the crowds and for the people with that strong moon emotional self and Venus values in Aquarius, the sign of the community, the sign of the crowds and the people. And but this chart changes a great deal when we do what's called in astrology a relocation chart. He was born in Buenos Aires and spent most of his life fairly close to home. In fact, his part of fortune, which one of the Arabic parts of astrology, is in Cancer, in his 2nd house, which means he was born and always felt very, very comfortable in his home and relates very, very strongly to the home and the family and the people and the place that he comes from. And now he's going out into the world, which is really expressing his sun sign, his life force in the Sagittarius, which is out there and traveling and seeing the world, but also his North Node is conjunct his sun in Sagittarius, which means his South Node in Gemini in his second house, which means he had a tendency throughout his life to stay local, feeling more comfortable and safe local, although his ultimate destiny, as indicated by his North Node conjunct, just eclipsed a Sagittarian position and very close to his natal Jupiter. His destiny was to go out there into the world and essentially express who he is in the strongest and most regal ways. Regal can be very strong with his Sagittarian energy here conjunct Jupiter. Now when we go to what's called in astrology a relocation chart, things get very, very interesting. In astrology, you're born at an exact moment in space and time at a particular place on the planet. In Western astrology, tropical geocentric astrology, for those who understand that kind of terminology. But when you change where you live, when you go somewhere else, you assume to a certain degree the new place that you're living in as if you were born in that place. We have what's called a relocation chart. And so you look at the exact moment that one was born in a new place on the world, and that changes, that new location, that relocation of that same birth moment, changes how you express yourself in that new place. When he moved from Buenos Aires to Vatican City and Rome, he went from having a Taurus rising, being the rising sign is how you express yourself and show yourself to the world and how people experience you. Taurus is very sort of gentle and sweet, willful and strong when needed, but there's a gentleness and a kindness and a comfortableness about him. When he switches his location to Rome, his birth chart has Leo rising. Leo is very proud. Leo is also very stubborn and very fixed, like his natal rising sign of Taurus. But Leo rising, there is a growing sense of pride and self-importance. His sun goes from being in the 8th house to the 5th house, which again is the house, the natural house of Leo in astrology, meaning the 5th sign, the 5th house. So he starts to feel more and more self-important. Even though he started off this papacy playing the part of the humble man as he has throughout his career as a priest, as a cardinal, as a bishop. But now as Pope in Rome, especially in the seat of Rome, he starts to become much more of a regal individual fairly quickly. We'll see this evolution as time goes on. And this will be somewhat of a surprise to those who voted him in office. The reason being is because when he was voted into office, the planet Mercury was what we call retrograde, going backwards in a different direction than we normally see it. It's an optical illusion that we have here on Earth. Our planets slowing down and turning around and going backward in space, but astrologically it symbolizes certain important things depending on which planet appears to be going backwards. So when one makes a decision, such as hiring a new employee for your company, in this case hiring a CEO for the Roman Catholic Church, often when Mercury goes direct again, turns its station and starts moving forward again, in this case just a few days after the new Pope was elected, you start to realize that the person you thought you hired may be very different than the person you actually did hire. What you thought you were going to get when you make a decision, an unplanned decision that you hadn't decided absolutely ahead of time, when Mercury is retrograde, often when Mercury goes direct, the person or the hire or the choice of the decision you made turns out to be something very different as the weeks and months go on than perhaps you thought you had decided upon. So in this case, there's going to be a lot of people in positions of power who even immediately, within a short time of his election, he walks out and chooses to be Pope Francis, representing or recalling Francis of Assisi, the famous man of peace and love and gentleness and close and respecting the earth, close to the animals and to nature and living a very simple life. This is a radical way of being Pope. Popes are used to being on the throne with grand crowns, the so-called tiara, the three-tiered crowns and the royal robes, and he may well move into that as time goes on because the regalness of the position will start growing on him fairly quickly. You may see him very quickly going a little bit fancier, although Leo rising, the new Leo rising he has in his relocation chart, Leo's all about style, and he will start to develop a very distinctive style of his own. Well, one of the things that happens when he goes from Buenos Aires, which is where he's lived pretty much all of his life, into the Vatican City of Rome, is the planet Pluto, which rules Scorpio in Western modern astrology, tropical astrology. The planet Pluto, which can have to do with power struggles and control and fight for control, and was in his natal third house in Buenos Aires, being the house of the intellectual, being the house of local things happening in your life, local politics, local challenges for power and position, intellectual pursuits and debates. But when he moves to the seat of the Pope in Vatican City, Rome, Pluto, his natal Pluto, goes into his 12th house for that relocation chart, which means the power struggles that he's going to have are going to be more behind the scenes. Pluto can represent your enemies, those that are calculating or planning against you. When he moves to Rome, which he has now, and takes the seat of being the Pope, his enemies go behind the scenes. They stop being obvious. His enemies become people who are calculating and plotting behind the scenes, whether within the church or without the church. There will be lots of secret enemies, is what we call a position in the 12th house. In this case, power struggles behind the scenes. So we won't see it necessarily publicly, but there will be serious power struggles behind the scenes. They've already started very quietly, because this man is taking the church in a radically different direction than it had been going in for a very, very long time. The change in this particular papacy, Pope Benedict XVI stepping down, 84 years, a Uranian, your radical change cycle from when the modern church began in the year 1929, I believe it was. The new Vatican City and the Lateran Treaty, which changed the game. The radical changes that have come about in his particular case are going to take, or have already taken, some very powerful people in the church by surprise. And so this man is going to have some serious enemies behind the scenes as time goes on, and he may have to do a lot of quiet secret and plotting behind the scenes as well in order to get beyond his trusting Taurus rising and learning to deal with the enemies that he has within. More in the future as we go on for Pope Francis. One thing for those out there who perhaps want to challenge him for power in Rome, or want to work with him, the idea of working with him is to deal with him intellectually and openly and suggest what you have to suggest. But you will find that this is a man with a very strong will and a very strong mind in particular. He wants what he wants, and he will go after it in no uncertain terms. And if you challenge this Pope was born with some very strong, fixed, stubborn elements, and his relocation chart in Vatican City will only bring those out even stronger. This will be a very stubborn, very willful, very pleasant, positive, open, a seemingly open man. But this is a man who has a very, very strong will, and he will things. He will be the real Pope. He will be the guy who is the absolute authority in the church, the unchallenged authority. And if anybody challenges him openly in the Roman Catholic power structure, they will lose. I'm Thomas Lyons for Astrology Tonight TV. We'll do more with the Pope and the Catholic Church as time goes on and interesting things happen in the news. In the meantime, you can find us at astrologytonighttv.com on the internet, and Astrology Tonight TV right here on YouTube. This is your host, Thomas Lyons, astrologer for Astrology Tonight TV. For more information about your own birth chart and what might be coming up for you in your future, you can go to our website, astrologytonighttv.com, and arrange for a personal, professional astrology reading for yourself or a loved one, or you can order your own personalized astrological chart and predictive transits that can be emailed directly to you anywhere on the earth. I'm Thomas Lyons, and you're watching Astrology Tonight TV, astrologytonighttv.com, right here on YouTube.